I'd like to kick off with, well, obviously, thank you very much for the kind introduction. That was a delight. I'd like to thank the university and particularly Emma, a former colleague of mine, for the invitation to come here and tell this story. It's kind of one story or two stories. No, it kind of splits into two, but they intersect. I'd also like to thank you in the room for choosing to come and listen to this today. And those who are listening online as well. Not quite sure where you may be in the world, but there we go. Okay, I've got an acknowledgement in the chat room that we are also live on the internet as well. So fantastic. I hope that you may hear something in my story today that you could apply to your own practice. And maybe the Thursday night show will gain a listener or two as a result. The story I'm going to talk about today is it's one about community. It's a community that first came together online and flourished there long before many of us found company in each other's physical presence. An internet gang, if you like. I'll begin, however, with a party. So, 4 days in a field is where we begin. Summer 2022. We all needed to take a little time out from the virus, its lockdowns, the war, and the ongoing economic crises everywhere. We also had an anniversary that needed celebrating, as well as the passing of one of our own that needed commemorating. The anniversary marked 10 years of eccentric, eclectic internet radio, with the Thursday night show, all night, every Thursday for a decade. To our minds, at least, the most eclectic radio station on the internet. Lovely, good. I arrived on site with Voice of Doom and VJ from Hell on the Wednesday. All of us still trying to get those quarantine feelings out from under our fingernails. Digit 3 and crew had already put up a marquee, built a stage and put a rig together on it. Next to the tents, DJ Gadget was ready with what we needed to take sound and vision from the stage to the web, including via a great big 5G mast. I soon realized that the event would probably benefit from a site manager. So I took on the role of keeping things organized and sticking to time. In my day job at a London university, I'd long been used to working with academics and others where the teachers and learners might be distributed in a variety of configurations across in-person and online modes of participation. This would be a very different kind of multimodal challenge. We'd hired a whole campsite for the event. So it was off bounds for the general public, and until we packed it with performers and their nearest or dearest, a pretty wide open space. TTNS 10 would therefore become the first hybrid festival I'd ever attended, where the performers were all together on site and the non-performing audience were all elsewhere, online and off-site, but also connected to the event and each other via the radio feed and the chat room. Before the main proceedings kicked off, we gathered together in the marquee in memory of old Father Shine, who had passed away between the emergence of the virus and the implementation of the first lockdown. We scattered what remained of his ashes over the marquee's grass dance floor, while archives of his shows played out on site and over the radio feed. Thursday was the day of the birthday itself. Jan Travell kicked off, phoning in her breakfast show live from a baking balcony in southern France. Doom and Flowers did a bass and drums play along on the grass to some jazz standards. I did a dub set, inadvertently inventing dub yoga out in the tent along the way. Danny M had lent the event his bass bins, and you could feel those bass. You could feel that bass deep down in your soul through those bins. It was a baking hot day, feeling like bush heat. I had started relaxing in ways I hadn't done for a long time, and took a few grass massages while others were shade bathing in the footprints of the large conifers nearby. The music continued with a Patron's Night set, followed by some afternoon chill beats from Chipko and Shuttergirl. Danny M played a set before heading off to become the site's pizza chef. Duna Vibe, A New Revolution, and Ian Joliet oversaw the transition from afternoon to evening. I put on some classic funk and soul tunes, while Voice of Doom followed later with a dad step set, playing the genre that had been invented on TTNS. The tent then became a club, as the lights, lasers, and smoke machine came out for a Digit 3 set, with Gadget playing into the smaller hours. Bookending the remote shows, Sister Lo-Fi phoned his lashings of house music in live from Kentucky. With the birthday itself over, but 2 more days of festival yet to go, we marked the transition point by live streaming the dawn chorus from the nearby forest out over the web in full spatial audio, which was quite a technical treat to try to configure. A bunch of friends, many meeting each other for the first time, had put on an event with next to no budget that would have cost hundreds of thousands of pounds to organize otherwise. Everyone had played to their strengths and brought what they could to make a greater whole. So that was the party. Let's go back to the beginning. My good friend Dom Robinson, you'll see him on the right-hand side there, is a streaming media consultant and a serial entrepreneur. He was the first person to put both Glastonbury Festival and the UK Prime Minister's Question Time live on the web for the first time. I've learned more about the internet from Dom than from anyone else. Obviously, we're both called Dom, so to make it a bit easier, I'm D1, he's D2. He was D2 before I was D1, but that's a story for another time. Back in the summer of 2012, Dom put out a post on his Facebook page about mixing some jungle tunes together on an iPad and finding a way to share a live feed of the mix to the web. Buried in the post's comments, he suggested that he was thinking about a regular Thursday night thing, and that there was probably a way to pass the baton to others to act as DJ handovers. I was curious about the prospect of doing radio again. I'd not really done any broadcasting myself since my brief stint on a graveyard shift on college radio at the University of South Florida back in 1994. I would undoubtedly be rather rusty, but it wouldn't take too long to pick up the habit again. A little over 2 weeks later, and with a test broadcast under our belts, we had a debut Thursday night show on the air. I opened with a 2-hour set playing as D1 Radio. Dom followed as D2 Radio, later to be known as Voice of Doom. And a friend of his went next as Harvey B. TTNS's first broadcast concluded with a set from 2 guys known as Bass Shack. Dane from Bass Shack, later known on TTNS as Digit 3, founded Sharpstream, which is now a leading provider of audio streaming software. We put together a rudimentary website that included the audio feed, a public chat room, and what we called the canvas, which in the room you can see here. And this is a prominent part of the site that we use for displaying photographs, artwork, or video. This would mean that we'd have things to look at while we were listening, and the website would function as the bar for any other listeners that happened to join us. having all reached stages in our lives where we were starting families, careers, or businesses that demanded our attention, it was no longer as easy to find ourselves going out to the clubs in Brighton of an evening. We therefore ended up going out by staying in. Radio Caroline had needed a ship moored in international waters to be able to broadcast some musical alternative to the aural gruel once served up to British ears. TTNS deployed a shoutcast server instead. And we didn't even need to hoist a Jolly Roger to reach a whole lot of ears ourselves. Dom sorted out licensing too, meaning we were not just a pirate station online. Following the launch of TTNS, we set about finding some others to join us in the virtual bar, who would serve up some listening delights themselves. Early additions that year included David Devinel, fresh from London's Eccentric Club, Mr. B, the gentleman rhymer, and Old Father Shine, an Irish tradesman who Dom had met when Shine was on a plastering job. What we now call the crew started to build out from there. The club membership fee for joining the crew was committing to playing your own show on TTNS. We didn't care what music you wanted to play, or even if you weren't playing music at all. But we'd give you a slot of airtime to fill in a way that you saw fit. After all, the only music policy on TTNS was that there was no music policy. Just bring your jam. TTNS became a platform for a group of friends to play music to each other. The crew thus became the inner circle. And I've just given the association with that photograph as well. The inner circle is literally a picture of it as well. Over 80 DJs have played on air with us since 2012. And we currently have an active roster of about 40 DJs. The current roster play out from the UK, France, the United States, and Mexico, although we have hosted broadcasts from other countries too. In 2013, we gained a patron. Herbie Flowers was probably one of Britain's most prolific session musicians, having played bass on an estimated 500 hit recordings by the end of the 1970s alone. You'll probably know him best from the bass line that provided to Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. Dom convinced Herbie to add his name to TTNS as patron, and in return, we'd put on some radio broadcasts featuring him and many of his friends. For our first Patrons Night show, Dom was supposed to handle the technicals, and I was set to be the primary host. I was really excited about this opportunity. However, I had a rare life moment where I was hospitalized that week. So I ended up stuck on my back in a ward in a Brighton hospital, listening over 4G to this amazing radio show that I was supposed to be hosting. Which was a bit of a disappointment. So there is an outer circle to TTNS, and that is the wider listenership as well. Because TTNS is free to listen to on the web, our bar counter is open to the world as well. Now, it's quite difficult to track listeners of internet radio, particularly when the feed is accessible via multiple routes. But even just as some hits on the website seem to suggest, we do have a global listenership. Sometimes people move from being a listener to a DJ, as with now mainstays like Hardy Miltz. Hardy discovered us through Mr. B's shows and ended up joining the crew in 2015. Hardy has since become the de facto bartender at TTNS and often plays a role in helping to onboard any newbies. Although we're more focused on the community than on the wider listenership, we always try to bear that extended circle in mind. Because, of course, with radio, you never know who might be listening. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the milestone events that we've had in the now 14 years since we've been on the radio. Having a virtual club where guests hang out every week in each other's company is all well and good. But sometimes you just need to get together in real life to consolidate and to nurture that community. That can be particularly tricky when you don't all live nearby each other. So you have to make an event of it. Because the nucleus of the station has always been Brighton, this is where the TTNS IRL events really began. For the first one, we combined the station's first birthday with Doom's 40th and took over part of Brighton's North Lane pub. Divinal hosted while Shine, Doom, Digit 3 and myself all played sets live from the pub, and our remote DJs filled in the gaps in the schedule. The centerpiece was live performances from Professor Elemental and Mr. B, the two leading exponents of chap hop, a genre I only discovered through TTNS. Having always favored live shows over pre-recorded ones, Patrons Night becomes a great opportunity to get some actual musicians together for a live broadcast. Highlight shows have included taking Italian electro swing pioneer Rosantique over to Herbie Flower's Bothy studio, and a night live from Brighton's Hobgoblin Music Shop, with walls full of the greatest array of stringed instruments I've ever seen together in one place. Brighton's drone enthusiast community provided another source of IRL events, alongside the Let's Drone Out chat show that debuted on TTNS. Mr. B and I both did live sets from Rottingdean's mini air show event in 2015, from a broadcast setup at the edge of the drone racing courses. All quite random things I'd have never done on regular radio. Then in 2016, we held our 4th birthday at Hidden Valley in a disused barn in rolling Sussex farmland. Digit 3 and crew built a pallet stage and decorated the barn, while others pitched tents or parked camper vans. Drone flying was included as one of the activities of the day, and we broadcast live from early afternoon and into the evening. In 2017, I took over the scheduling of DJs, bringing a regular rhythm to programming and a focus on nurturing the DJ roster. For our 5th birthday that summer, we managed to showcase as much of that roster as we possibly could, with an evening where the baton passed between 17 different DJs. So it's kind of trying to fit the whole roster into one night, really. We also introduced a new system that would enable us to put together programs of pre-recorded sets from the archives to keep the music flowing when it wasn't a Thursday night. We can now broadcast shows 24/7, which took us further down the road towards feeling like a proper radio station. Kudos to Grins these days, who is handling the scheduling of the off-air sets. The following year, TTNS was given our own tent at one of Sussex's leading family festivals, Elderflower Fields. This would be the biggest IRL event yet, and meant a significant scaling up of operations. We put together 4 days of programming that included both live acts and DJs. Now, I'd never achieved my youthful ambition of playing at Glastonbury, so this is about as close as I was going to get. It was also an opportunity, again, for many of the DJs that had come on board in the preceding few years to meet each other in person for the first time. We have long aimed to trace a Thursday night around the globe as part of our weekly operations. Once a week, it is always a Thursday night somewhere or other. We aim to one day be the soundtrack to Thursday nights everywhere. Practically speaking, however, this would mean dividing the world up into 4 main show zones and finding enough consistent and reliable DJs in each zone. And while this remains the long-term ambition, we at least managed to trial such an idea during the first summer of COVID. Now, a little predecessor context first. The first live multinational, multi-satellite television production took place in 1967 and was called Our World. So there were national broadcasters from 14 different countries, as well as the European Broadcasting Union, that participated in this 2-hour event, which was shown on TV that summer in 24 different countries. It was a technological milestone in television broadcasting and had an estimated audience of between 400 and 700 million people, which is obviously a record for television audiences at the time. It's best remembered in the UK for the participation of the Beatles, who were filmed performing their new song, All You Need Is Love, for the first time. Now, the TTNS 8th birthday event had nothing like the technical degree of coordination as Our World, never mind the audience. But we planned something that attempted to follow in the slipstream of what our broadcast predecessor had made possible. This became 20 hours of live music from around the world that traced a Thursday night and spanned from New Zealand to California. And we needed a lot more than just love to pull something like this off. A memorable post-COVID event, post-COVID outside broadcast event, was a 2022 live show that we did in Brighton, which was held in an old church and with an act called the New Note Orchestra. The orchestra was organized in a circle, and in the center, DJ Gadget placed a 360 camera and a spatial audio microphone, both rigged up to that same 5G mast that was placed outside the church. It would be the first TTNS broadcast with fully immersive sound and vision, where listeners or viewers could experience the performance live as if they were sat in the middle of the circle. Not all TTNS events happen IRL, though. For the 11th birthday, we introduced a DJ challenge and tasked each act with taking on a set themed around the lines on the London Underground. I ended up with the Northern Line here, and I was astonished at the number of songs that were about the various different stations on the Northern Line. We used songs about stations where different lines intersected as transition tracks between sets. So it was quite a bit of coordination here as well. And each DJ was, of course, careful to mind the gap on a handover. Okay, so the Thursday Night Show is an example of an online community. Let's go back a little bit to one of the earliest online communities. In 1993, the same year that Tim Berners-Lee, who I notice today has a room in this building named after him, made the World Wide Web available to the general public. I was a DJ on a student radio station at the University of Sussex. American writer Howard Rheingold released a book called The Virtual Community, Homesteading on the Electronic Frontier, written in the new language of HTML. Rheingold wrote about how for a couple of hours a day, this is 1993, he would plug a computer into his home telephone line and make contact with other people from around the world via a computer conferencing system known as the Well. Hard to imagine how revolutionary that would have been at the time now. Writing long before this thing we now call social media came into being, he described all the things that people in virtual communities could do, but in doing so, they would leave their physical bodies behind. You can't kiss anybody, and nobody can punch you in the nose, Rheingold stated. But a lot can happen within those boundaries. While Rheingold was enthusiastic about the liberating potential of computer-mediated communications, he was also mindful of the pitfalls of mixing technology and human relationships. He presciently observed that the technology that makes virtual communities possible has the potential to bring enormous leverage to ordinary citizens at relatively little cost. But this latent technical power must be used intelligently and deliberately by an informed population. I was very struck from 2026 reading those words again today. He also noted what he termed as big power and big money would always find a way to control access to virtual communities. So it was important for people to learn about how to use this technology while they still had the freedom to do so. That's it. Sounds very familiar to me. Okay. A brief detour by way of a workplace story. And then I think I'm going to come to a little bit of a pause. In the summer of 2020, back before the COVID vaccines were authorized for public use, my university realized that we would need to run the coming academic year mostly all online again. Teaching and learning activities would therefore need to be rethought. The university developed a set of overarching principles for the coming year. And the digital education team I'm part of hastily bootstrapped a rudimentary guide to learning design for online teaching. We also put together a Microsoft Teams site as a forum for staff to get answers to quick queries around online teaching and for the sharing of good practice and ideas. I encouraged a colleague of mine to run this proto-community, which gave teaching staff both synchronous and asynchronous modes of interaction. The lessons I'd learned from trying to keep the community of TTNS DJs involved and engaged over the years came in very handy. We provided multiple modes for interaction, yet tried to keep things simple. We looked to ensure that live activity had a regular rhythm to it, so that the audience could depend on the platform. We devolved agency to our users and encouraged them to feel ownership of the space. And we tried to make sure that the learning and teaching community was not just somewhere helpful, but that it would also be sticky. In other words, somewhere that people would want to be. Today, the community is not only still going, but is thriving with over 500 members, a rich diversity of topics discussed across multiple channels, and pretty good audience attendance at many of the live events that we host there. So before I turn to you in the room for a brief discussion activity, we're going to hear at the end of this section from some of the TTNS DJs themselves about what the station means to them and why it matters.
The range of DJs and the complete lack of judgment in the incredible welcoming chat room is what taught me to firstly stay, then engage in chat, having never engaged in other social media, and finally to pluck up the courage to share my own random taste in music. The feedback from the clearly knowledgeable and unjudgmental listeners is really appreciated and makes me come back again and again.
What's kept me here and really removed any barriers I might have encountered was how supportive and non-judgmental the community is here. It's a fun place to hang out. No one gives you a hard time if there's a technical thing that goes wrong. In fact, the opposite. Everyone jumps in with examples of how they've screwed up or reassurances that it doesn't matter.
I love TTNS because of the music and the people it brings together. I owe so much of my own diverse music tastes and my radio presentation skills to TTNS. And then there's the chat room. I always say this when promoting my radio shows on TTNS. Come for the music, stay for the people. Because I did. And in this age where so much depends on optics, I love the chat room for exposing me to truly interesting people based on what they say and what they play, not how they look.
I'm new to TTNS, and even so, I have felt welcomed and supported not only as a fellow DJ, but also as a familiar friend. Being a part of TTNS, I feel supported, cheered on, and accompanied in my journey as a TTNS DJ. I also feel connected with everyone in the sense that we enjoy and support all genres of music and have interconnected tastes and styles. TTNS feels like a family of friends who also happen to love music.
TTNS is, to me, a platform inviting artists and DJs to express their art. This means freedom. It is not commercial radio. Reminds me of college radio, the only radio on airwaves that is not controlled by record companies that are major or just major in being thieves. Let's keep it real.